German police are still hunting for the perpetrator of a terrorist attack at a Berlin market yesterday that killed a dozen people. Terrorism experts are warning that 2017 could be a challenging year, and that's against a backdrop of global uncertainty caused by the Brexit and the election of Donald Trump as United States President. To discuss some of the big picture issues confronting the world at the moment, I'm joined now from Brisbane by Australia's former Prime Minister Kevin Rudd. Good to have you back, Mr. Rudd.
Good to be with you, Lee.
Thinking about this week's terrorist attacks in Berlin and also the assassination of the Russian ambassador to Turkey, how is it that with all the resources and effort expended since 9/11 that the world feels less safe?
Well, I think what we're dealing with is a phenomenon where most of us in the collective West and elsewhere are dealing with the symptoms of terrorism, whereas dealing with the fundamental underlying causes lie largely beyond our control. And those things are this huge theological war going on within Islam itself, by and large. And secondly, the radical problem of increased unemployment for, in particular, young Arab males, and more broadly economic non-development across much of the Middle East. So these are the two big driving factors, and the levers of control we have over those are relatively limited. And so therefore we're actually dealing with the external manifestation, preventing an attack here, minimising the impact there, and regrettably that's going to be the way it is for some time.
So because those underlying causes are beyond our control, does that mean that we all have to get used to just living in a less safe world?
No, there are concrete things that we can do about it. Number one is in terms of the foreign policy of countries around the world, in particular the United States, but others as well. We need to support mainstream governments and regimes across the Middle East and beyond, which have significant Muslim populations, so that we can have a strong, stable security relationship with them and maximise their ability to deal with, frankly, what are very significant religious insurgencies within their countries. Number two, I talked before about economic underdevelopment. The total focus of our development policy and the activities of the United Nations and the World Development Banks should be on the development of economies and jobs across these most fragile economies. And finally, countries like us, Australia, we must have seamless intelligence relationships with countries across the world, in particular with Indonesia, given we're going to see the return of so many foreign fighters before too much longer from Syria and Iraq.
Speaking of Indonesia, you're the president of the Asia Society Policy Institute, which released a report last week looking at how various Asian nations feel about the prospect of a Trump presidency in the United States. The report noted that the election of Trump raises more questions than it answers, and nobody's sure what to expect next. How should countries, including Australia, operate in such an environment of uncertainty?
Well, it is what it is, and President Trump will be sworn in very soon. And I think the watchword across not just the West, but across East Asia, Southeast Asia, is one of strategic uncertainty, because we do not know where the policy pieces are going to lie and where the individual chips are likely to fall. Having said that, we should not talk ourselves into a position of collective doom, panic and despair. These are early transition periods for a new administration, and I think where that therefore leaves the future for countries like Australia is to have the strongest possible private diplomatic relationship with this new administration, so that we can speak clearly, cogently, directly, where we believe US administration may be going right off the rails in terms of its impact on regional stability and prosperity. That, I think, is the challenge of the Turnbull government.
Every time I ask somebody in an official position, whether in government or opposition, about the alliance under Donald Trump, they always say the alliance is stronger than the personalities in it because it's traditionally been strong and so on. But how can that be? There's got to be a limitation to that, surely, at some point, doesn't there?
Well, we've been around for a long time with this alliance, and I think the first thing we should do, Lee, is just not talk ourselves in what I describe as the dumb binary game of, China or the United States. I mean, that's a game for suckers and we shouldn't play it, though I see a lot of the commentary still in Australia points us in that direction. We can walk and chew gum, and we should. But the second point is this. Within the framework of the alliance, We should under no circumstances repeat, I think, the hideous mistake made under the Howard government by simply being a cheer squad for what was then the Bush administration's determination to invade Iraq. If we see a repeat of that in any form, either within the Asian hemisphere or more broadly, our responsibility as an ally is not to act as a cheerleader. Our responsibility as an ally is to say, our friends in Washington, you cannot and must not do this for the following clear reasons. We are saying this to you as an allied partner in a relationship which goes back to, frankly, Curtin during the war in 1941.
You mentioned China. What are your contacts in China making of the belligerence that Donald Trump is displaying towards China?
It's a varied feast. Remember, the US-China relationship's been to lots of ups and downs. We've had Taiwan Straits crises of one form or another going back over the last several decades, so there's nothing new under the sun there. But I think the fair thing to say is that the Chinese have an expectation of strategic stability in its great power relationships. In the United States now, they believe that that is now lacking. I think the challenge for the period ahead is for a channel to be opened up as early as possible between the two administrations so that the parameters can be set for one China, for North Korea, which is this railway train, sort of freight train rolling down the tracks towards us in terms of its nuclear weapons program. And the thing which has got the potential to undermine all of our regional prosperity and frankly global prosperity is if we see the emergence of a trade war or a currency war between the United States and China as well.
Well, you know, you mentioned a few of the issues there, North Korea's nuclear ambitions, potential of a trade war, there's the tensions in the South China Sea. You said earlier in the interview about foreign fighters returning to Indonesia. Among all of those pretty complicated challenges in our region, is there any one that you see as more pressing or concerning than the others?
Yeah, I'll give you three of them. North Korea, North Korea and North Korea. I've been following this debate since Adam was a boy, and the bottom line is we're on a technical trajectory here, Lee. It's to do with North Korean technical capabilities in terms of missile sophistication, in terms of missile range, the availability of nuclear material, and their ability to miniaturize that into a warhead. That is on a very rapid timescale. Therefore, the number one priority in terms of US-China relations, leaving everything else to one side, is to reach an agreement strategically between Xi Jinping and President Donald Trump-elect on how this can be arrested and stopped. The alternatives are too horrible to talk about.
A study released by the ANU this week finds that here in Australia, Australians' satisfaction with democracy has collapsed to its lowest levels since the Whitlam dismissal. And there's been a lot of discussion about the mainstream parties and the rise of forces like Nick Xenophon's team and Pauline Hanson's One Nation. People have put it in the context of what's happened with the Brexit and the rise of Trump and also Bernie Sanders in the US. What do you think is going on?
I think, Lee, it would be wrong of today's political leaders just to push this to one side as if it's just some passing trend. I think we're looking at something structural here. There's a very interesting poll by Lowy here in Australia, going back several months now, which said that I think 24–25% of people under the age of 30 thought that under certain circumstances, non-democratic forms of government were just as preferable to democratic forms of government. We begin to see, therefore, an erosion in the popular buy-in to what we all thought was a given. Going to what you then do about it, I think what's unleashed across so much of the Western world at present are deep challenges to economic growth models, slow growth for a decade now, almost since the crisis, but critically, a rising income gap between rich and poor, and the politics of inequality and the politics of marginalisation are now a mainstream political concern. Unless we redesign a social contract within, let's call it democratic capitalism, I believe this constituency of people are saying we're not getting anything out of this anymore, it's just going to get bigger and bigger.
So do you see evidence that the mainstream parties in Australia, and I mean your own party as well, the Labor Party, are listening to what people are saying?
Look, Lee, I'm conscious of what I don't know because I live in the United States, I head an American think tank, and I'm back here in Australia from time to time. But I think One thing is absolutely clear, frankly, on which there should be some bipartisan consensus, and which is what's the fundamental condition for a democracy to function? And that is a common platform for a national conversation about core policy priorities. Well, in Australia, with the traditional media, with a Murdoch monopoly of 70% of print, we don't really have it there. Secondly, with the balkanisation of social media and every tribe just reading its own stuff in this post-fact, post-truth world, the ability to have a common conversation around a common subject is also being eroded. So, frankly, for the future, this sounds like a plug for you guys, unless there's a radical continuing investment in what I describe as politically neutral public broadcasting, the very essence of having a democratic conversation falls apart, and both political parties should be getting behind that rather than eating away at your resource base, which I notice the current government is doing.
Next year will mark 10 years since the election of the Rudd government. I don't know if it's just me, but that seems incredible. It feels like about 5 minutes ago.
I haven't aged a bit, I don't know about you. So.
What do you think is the key for the ALP to secure its future? Not just to win government again, but to ensure its continuing relevance as a political force?
Look, this is always hard to answer in a single sentence, but just let me leave you with 2 or 3 thoughts. One, I think the current team around Shorten are pretty good. When you look at them, and I know most of them, a combination of Wong and Plibersek and Bowen and Albanese and those sort of folks. I mean, these are highly experienced people. So whatever the debate is about Bill's leadership skills, he actually has a reasonable team around him. That's the first point. And I contrast that with, frankly, the other side, and I think it's chalk and cheese. But the second thing more structurally is this. For the future, it's parallel to the conversation we just had, Lee, about the future structure of the Australian economy beyond the resources boom. I remember Costello and Howard lampooning me in 2007 when I had the temerity to say we must prepare for the day when the mining boom is over, O-V-E-R. They thought it was an unpatriotic statement. Well, guess what? It's over. So the structure of the Australian economy around population, participation, productivity, and through that, education, skills, training, infrastructure, the national broadband network which fuels small business startups right around the world and is now deficient in this country, that's the core growth agenda. But parallel to that is the Australian application of the new social contract in regions which are missing out. And I suppose the final point is this. I wrote recently, I think in the Fairfax press here in this country, about Labor's continuing problem with union-based factions. And unless that is dealt with root and branch, then it will continue to be a cancer within the Labor Party body politic.
Kevin Rudd, good to have you with us. We're out of time tonight, but it'd be good to get you back on next year in that 10th anniversary year to talk more about your legacy. Thank you very much, and Merry Christmas to you and yours.
Happy Christmas to all your viewers, Lee.